Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dayo Samuel Report. I am Dayo Samuel and I'm reporting live from somewhere in the world, perhaps. It's been a minute. Last week I couldn't have an episode simply because I was out and about. On Friday last week I had a Canva workshop somewhere in Lincoln at the University of Lincoln. And on Saturday I had a speaking engagement with the leading tribe, talking about navigating and sharing my story right there. Today on this episode, I want to walk you through a couple of things I've learned when it comes to turning fear into strength at work. This episode is dedicated to every single generalist, every single polymath, every single jack of all trade who has at some point being intimidated by the fear of failure. And here is what I have come to understand. I know how tough it can be when you're feeling the pressure at work, and there seems to be this nagging fear of failure that quietly slides into the DM of your heart, and it's constantly tugging at your heart, pulling you in all manner of direction. Sometimes it can even beat some funny rhythm, some funny drums, and you worry that you might not be able to succeed or meet the expectations of perhaps your expectations of your boss, the expectation of your significant other, the expectation of your parents, the expectation of those people that you care about. Now, when it comes to the workplace particularly, the expectation could be coming from bosses, from your employers, and sometimes the expectation could be flipped to be coming from the people you employ. Now, fear can actually stop you from taking risk. It can pull you in many directions, as it has happened in my own life and the life of many people that I've had to work with over the years. Now, what I want to do in this episode is to give you the courage and the necessary insights you need to lead your life and business in the direction that matters the most to you. And I want you to understand that if you are currently facing fear, if you are currently experiencing fear at work, or you're experiencing fear in the thing that you're trying to do, I want you to first of all understand that you're not alone. I've been there myself, and I actually lived and grew up with fear in the major part of my life. I can go down the rabbit hole and tell you a lot of stories about the fears I've had to encounter and I've had to overcome in my own life. It's even as specific as the fear of snakes. I remember growing up at some point, and there was no fear of snakes at that point. And then one day, I saw a snake. I saw something at the top of our house, and I saw snake, and I was like, "Oh, that looks like snake." And I told my mom, "Hey, look at snake up there." And my mom screamed, and instantly that day, the fear of snakes was kind of installed in my mind. And from that day, I began to fear snakes to the point that when I sleep at night, I began to dream of snakes. I began to wake up feeling scared of snakes. So when it comes to fear, I've been there. I understand very well, and I know what people like yourself, how you feel when it comes to snake. And so what I want to do today is I want to share some actionable ideas that have helped me and helped my clients in the past push through fear. So can we do this together? All right. So let's talk about how to deal with fear as a generalist. So how generalists turn fear of failure into a strength at work. I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I'm going to be walking you through all of these one after the other. So again, what I want to share with you is how to take fear. Let me select my highlighter here. How to turn fear into strength at work. First thing I would like to share with you is, and I know that this may sound a little bit interesting, is I want you to start by extracting lessons from your past failures. Every single person, perhaps you, perhaps myself, we've all had some form of failure in our lives. And what I want you to do is to start by extracting lessons from failures. Now, in order to understand what I just told you to do, you need to understand that all negative experiences have positive benefits. I mean, literally, all negative experiences in this life carry in them some form of positive benefits. A lot of times we are clouded by the anxiety, we are clouded by the pain, we are clouded by the disappointment of what we are trying to do, or of the fear that we are currently experiencing. And so we do not actually take time to extract the positive benefits. Now, even the most painful experience you've ever had in your life, carry in them some hidden positive benefits if you actually look closely enough. I want you to think back to a failure you've experienced right now, whether that's at work, whether that's at home, whether that's in a very private aspect of your life. I want you to think back to that failure that you've experienced. And I want you to write down, pick a note, pick an app on your phone, perhaps maybe Google Keep, like I use back then, or maybe it's Notion, or it could be maybe Apple Notes. It can literally be any app. Pick an app on your phone and then pick an experience of failure you've probably had at some point in your life. And what you want to do right now is you want to ask yourself, what lessons did I learn from that failure? When I was having fear of failure at work, or when I was having fear of failure in another aspect of my life, what did I learn from that? For example, so let's say maybe you missed an important deadline. Could that have taught you to prioritize your tasks better? Or you took on too many projects and failed to deliver? Like it always happens to those of us who are generalists. We just say yes to all kind of tasks. Maybe you have said yes to too much of tasks, too much of projects, and you failed to deliver. Could that have taught you to say no more often? And like I've begun to explain to people what I do in my own case, I put things like that. I put ideas on an ideas wait list. One day I'm going to talk about that perhaps. An ideas wait list for me is, I have an idea, I flesh out the idea a little bit, I take the idea to a step further. So it goes from just, I could try this. So let's say I have an idea instantly right now. As I have an idea, I pick my pen. Sometimes it's actually using a pen and just drawing out things like this. That's what I do most of the time. So let's say I flesh out that idea. By the time I'm done fleshing out the idea, I've connected it with a lot of other things in my life. What I do is I ask myself, is this something I want to do right now? How does this connect to something I'm executing right now? If it's not connecting to something I'm executing right now, what I literally do is I just put it on an ideas wait list. So I have a database in my Notion where all I do in that Notion board is I just file. So when I write something, I just move it to ideas wait list. I just put it on an ideas wait list. And that is pretty simple for me. Maybe one day I'm going to show you how I set that up inside Notion. But of course, I have to create a completely blank database so you won't see a lot of the ideas I have here. Now, I also wanted to look at many experiences. Again, looking at some of the failure experiences you've had. Could it be that you aimed for perfection too much and you realized that you needed to be a bit more forgiving of yourself? That could be a negative experience that you could turn into a positive lesson. Once you identify those lessons, you want to ask yourself, have you actually applied the lessons that all of these fears, all of these failures have taught you in the past? If you haven't, it means you have not learned the lesson, and you will keep repeating the same cycle until you actually learn that lesson. So let's say, as with the case of a client of mine that I was handling many years back, this should be about 3 or 4 years ago, thereabout, that I was handling a client, and the client came to our session. The client came to our session because she said that she wanted to deal with some things that was going on with her, but at the point where she came into our sessions, then the client was about to lose her marriage. She was fearful and panicky, and she was dealing with the potential loss of her marriage. So she was at that point where she felt like, okay, maybe it's possible that either I walk away from the marriage or the marriage just has to crash. Now, the main reason was basically because she felt some of the things going on in her life were affecting her in her marriage and were also affecting her in her work. Interestingly, while we were having our sessions, we found that the reason she is afraid that her marriage may fail is because her parents' marriage had failed and she had not taken time to process and to extract positive lessons from her parents' negative, failed marriage experience. So in our session, I remember asking her if she could pick only three lessons from her parents' failed marriage. And she said, well, I'm not sure if there's anything I can learn from my parents' marriage, but let me try. By the time I began to, of course, I gave her the space, I created an environment for her to be able to talk, to be able to open up, to be able to share. What eventually happened was that she picked 4 lessons that she could take away from her parents' marriage. And then I asked her at that point that, is there any of these lessons? Is there any of them that you're currently doing right now that could be contributing to your own marriage failing? That is, so when she picked the positive lessons from her parents' marriage, each positive lesson was tied to a negative experience. That's what I'm trying to say. I am also trying to be mindful of the fact that I don't need to tell you everything here, right? But again, you don't know the person I'm talking about. So let's say one of the examples she gave was the fact that the father had an extramarital affair, and that created a sour moment. And that was actually the beginning of what eventually became marriage that broke down. Now, what happened was she didn't take time to pay attention to that and learn what actually went wrong. So when she began to itemize and began to kind of analyze what went wrong, she realized that it did not start with the father, it started with the mother. The mother had begun to stop looking her best. The mother had stopped being her best for the father. And the father was driven by variety, was driven by aesthetics. And because that was happening, and he was getting tired, and he could not vocalize how he was feeling to the mom, that led the man down the path. Now, what happened was that when we were analyzing this exact same scenario, what we found was the lady had begun to toe the same path. So she, even though she was saying that a marriage may fail, she had begun to behave exactly the same way her mom behaved. And that was taking her down that path. And she was unaware of it. So by the time we began to extract all those lessons from her parents' failed marriage to her own life, she began to realize that she was beginning to do exactly the things she hated in her parents' marriage that she did not want. And by paying attention to all of that lessons, by pulling out the negative experience of our own parents' marriage, what happened was she was able to turn the negative experiences that were going on in her own life into something that had positive benefits. Interestingly, by the end of that day, it became as though the marriage was saved. And by the way, I'm not a marriage counselor. She had come to session for something completely different. A marriage failing was just one of the things she put up as one of the way we used to say it, the triggers for failure, the triggers for anxiety. That was what she came to sessions for. By the time we began to drill into what was surrounding this feeling of the marriage going to fail, we discovered that. And as we discovered that together, we began to work on it. And so, of course, that's an entire conversation that I would like to go into, but perhaps it might not be relevant for this conversation we're having right now. Now, what I want you to understand is, if you have ever failed in the past at all, maybe you have failed when you were young, maybe you failed at a task at work, or maybe you failed to get a particular job, like I failed to get a job when I landed in the UK back in 2022. When I landed in the UK in 2022, I had, over 200 failed rejections of jobs that I applied for and they could not pick me. what I constantly did every time I had an unfortunately email, because that's how the emails were worded, something kept telling me that why is UK recruiters, hiring managers fond of this statement? Unfortunately, we will not be moving forward with this year. That was a statement I kept noticing in all of the emails. Interestingly, the job I'm in right now, when the email first came in, it's quite funny that I didn't read the email. I scanned to find unfortunately first. Before I said, oh, there's no unfortunately in this email. That was when I paid attention. I said, okay, let me see what's in the email. Then I realized that, oh, okay, it looks like I qualified for the next level. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you have failed at a job, you failed at even getting a job, or maybe in some other context that is not completely related to your work, can you take a look at those experiences and ask yourself, what lesson can I pick out from these experiences? And write out everything that comes to mind. In my neurotherapy classes, we learned something very powerful. And it is when you're asking yourself questions like these, don't judge what you're writing. Don't even filter what you're writing. Just dump everything that is coming to your mind. Dump it on paper. Reason why you may probably notice that I use a lot of drawing is because getting things out of your mind is a way for your fingers to help in the processing of emotions. And it's the reason why journaling is powerful. Especially, you will notice that journaling did not start with digital mediums. Journaling started with physical paper mediums. And look at, I'm talking about paper mediums. And look at, I have one of my old Moleskine journals here. This is a journal from 2016, 2017. So the date in this paper right now says 29 November 2016, which is very interesting. So go through, pick some of those experiences you've had in your life and ask yourself, what lessons can I pick out from these experiences? Write out everything that comes to your mind. Do not try to filter. Don't try to judge. Don't say, don't judge anything that comes to your mind. Just pick paper and a pen and then just dump everything in your mind about that experience that you can recall. Trust me, make that demand on your mental capacity. Make that demand on your mind. You'll see that it's going to bring you to a place where you feel, I've let out everything. Okay, so now, let's now start turning that into action steps that I can take in order to not repeat the same lesson. So again, what I want you to take out from this first lesson here is that all negative experiences have positive lessons to teach you. If you don't pay attention, you will not get the lesson. But if you pay attention, you will learn the most important lesson when dealing with fear of failure. It is that failure has a lesson to teach. I'm going to repeat that again. Failure has a lesson to teach. Just as all negative experiences, let me switch that to this. Just as all negative experiences carry with them some positive benefits. I hope you're still with me. All right, this is still the Dayo Summary Report, and I hope that this is meaningful to you so far. All right, so moving on from there, let's talk about the second thing you can do in order to turn fear of failure into strength at work. Let's go to the next thing. And it's called symbolic modeling. Symbolic modeling. What does symbolic modeling means? Well, it's another powerful tactic for overcoming fear of failure, particularly when it comes to workplace, when it comes to even business, even fear generally. Symbolic modeling is about surrounding yourself with inspiration and possible positive role models. And I picked this from a study that I read. In the late 1970s, the psychologist Albert Bandura demonstrated this by showing that children with a fear of dogs could overcome that fear by repeatedly watching videos of people playing with dogs without fear. So that means while they were doing the study, they kept putting children who had fear of failure they kept putting them in front of screen to watch other people playing with dogs without fear. And gradually, because the children were repeatedly exposed to that, their own fear of failure gradually went down. And that helped me. When I read the study, one of the things I saw there was the rate of that experiment. It had a lot of success, actually. And it's the fact that the eyes of those kids kept taking in. I'm trying not to go into a lot of representational systems conversation right now. But let me just explain what representational systems mean. It means that for every experience, there are tiny details that our brains absorb. Those tiny details could be as simple as a smell. For every experience, there's a smell. For every experience, there's a taste. For every experience, there's a sound. For every experience, there's something your eyes see, that your eyes capture. And there is something your ears hear. So it's about the five senses, what the five senses are taking in whenever you're having an experience. And that's the same thing that happens with fear of failure, even fear generally. For every fear you have, there's an associated representational system. There is a sense, there's one of your senses is associated with any fear you have. It could be something you smell, it could be something you saw, it could be something you see, it could be something you heard, it could be something you tasted, it could be maybe something you felt. It could be as simple as it's feeling. Now, from that study, they found that the more different people these children saw modeling this fearless behavior, the more effective it was at helping the children conquer their own doggy phobias. Now, you can apply this same principle to your fear of failure. How, you may ask? Well, is by looking, and now this is the thing here. We often think that we are the only ones struggling with fear and failure, but trust me, you're not alone. A lot of people actually struggle with this as well. Now, the general idea here with symbolic modeling is that you can overcome your fears by exposing yourself to examples of other people confronting and conquering their own fears. So this is why you see inspirational and motivational talks. This is why you see that sometimes they work. When you hear somebody, from my background, in Nigeria we say aspire to perspire. Sometimes aspire to perspire is not so much of a joke. It's because as you listen to someone else tell the stories of the fears they've gone through, the fears they've had to encounter, the fears they've had to overcome, that creates within your mind, it gives you a sense of, maybe I could do it too. Maybe I could try that too. So what you need to do here is you need to actively. So what I recommend for you here, let me bring back my screen. Okay, my screen is here. So what I recommend to you is actively seek out. Oh no, that's not the right one. So actively, I thought I wanted to use right. So what you want to do is you want to actively seek out people that you can call reference points. In my own case, I call them forerunners. People that have gone before me, people that have been there before me. And I think last week I was writing in my note and I wrote something about all ideas have grandparents. You just need to go look for who was the grandparent of that idea. So what you want to do is you want to actively seek out stories, books, videos, blog posts, any examples of people confronting their fears of failure head-on and emerging successful on the other side. Again, remember that our goal here is to help you take fear and turn it to strength, right? So let me explain this a little bit from my own life. In February 28, 2012, I came across something called podcast. And I was working in an office at that point. I was working as a media staff for a non-profit organization. It was actually a Christian ministry. I was working as the media staff and I came across podcast, not as the word podcast. I actually was doing a research online and then I hit play on a page. I saw that there was an audio player on that page, and I clicked play. And what happened was, the first thing that came out from that audio is, "This is your life episode." I can't even remember the episode. But when "This is your life, are you who you want to be?" When I heard that, I was like, is this supposed to be a song or what? But guess what happened? The next voice that came in said, "Welcome to something, 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 and this is Michael Hyatt." And I was like, wait. So I decided to check, who is this Michael Hyatt guy? And what happened was, Michael Hyatt was, well, at that point, he was the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers, and he was in charge of, and he was actually building a personal brand outside of his job, using his name, created a podcast called "This Is Your Life." And I listened to the first episode, listened to the second episode, listened to the third episode. Then I went down the rabbit hole and began to learn everything I can about Michael Hyatt and about podcasting. That led me to discovering people like Cliff Ravenscraft, to discovering people like, what's his name again? The Audacity to Podcast, to discovering the School of Podcasting, to discovering even social media marketing. What's the name of that podcast again? I think Social Media Jungle, something like that. That led me down that part of discovering a lot of podcasts, to the point where I even discovered Entrepreneur of Fire. Now, what happened was, because Michael Hyatt was the, so to say, the pipeline through which I entered into the podcast world, I enrolled in literally every single program I had the money to pay for at that point, including Platform University. I learned everything about building platforms. I learned everything about setting up a personal brand business online, learned about everything. And this was way back in 2012, 2013. Guess what? By 2014, when I launched my own podcast, now notice the reference point is coming from Michael Hyatt. Having studied everything about podcasts, everything about the format, and putting Michael Hyatt as my own reference point, heard the stories, heard a lot of things, read a lot of his books, using that as a reference point. When I was going to launch my podcast, guess what I did? I simply modeled the things that Michael Hyatt did in order to create my own platform, in order to even launch. I did my launch on Twitter. I think it was a Wednesday, June 25th. If I'm correct, June 25th, 2014 was when I released the first episode of my podcast. Started it in February, but I could not release it because, again, I had the fear of failure. I was constantly battling failure, that people will not like my voice. People will not like how I talk. I don't have an English accent. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't even have a fancy podcast studio like I have right now. Now, that's 2014 till now. That's exactly 14 years, right? Interestingly, I kept having, actually that's 10 years, not 14 years. All of that kept going on in my mind. But you know, the interesting thing that was constant in all of this is the fact that every time I have to think about what I need to do next, I will use Michael Hyatt as a reference point and say, what did he do at that point? In fact, it was that time I also discovered who runs You Are the Brand podcast. Before, it was not You Are the Brand. It was actually a different name. But today they call it, today is remanded to You Are the Brand podcast. But I hope you understand what I'm trying to tell you here. What you want to do is you want to actively seek out stories, books, videos, people that you can use as reference points. If you want to call them forerunners, like I call them, that's what I used to call them. And I use forerunner in the case of John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. John the Baptist was a forerunner to Jesus Christ. Even though the Bible does not detail a lot of their relationship, we all know that from birth till they were somehow connected. So John the Baptist was a forerunner of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who was a later runner, so to say, of John the Baptist. But you understand what I'm trying to say. So what you want to do is you want to join communities. Well, I'll probably be starting a community very soon where you can engage with others walking through similar struggles. You want to join other people who are going through the same thing. You want to look for people who have been there and done that. And then you want to join their community. You want to put yourself in places where you can have repeated exposures to what they are doing. Now, seeing diverse role models resolve their fears again and again will help your brain take in certain instructions that will be so unconscious for you that at some point when you want to act, something will just flow to the front of your mind, like, this is what this person did at this point. So I can literally do it too. Now, again, you will see that this came from studying a study that was way back in the late 1970s. Now, some of these psychologists have also begun to put them as my own forerunners. For example, Richard Bandler, the creator of neuro-linguistic programming, Robert Dietz. Those are some people I call forerunners because they think in terms of systems the way my mind works. And lately, I've begun to discover people who, within the PKM movement, I've begun to discover, what's this guy's name? I've forgotten his name. I can't recall his name right now. But his name is in my is in my note as someone I need to start studying. So what you need to do, if you are experiencing fear of failure, if you are currently battling the fear of failure, who are the people who have gone past this phase? How have they handled that? What lessons can you pick from them? What experiences do they have? What kind of things can you learn from them? How can you utilize their learnings from their life in your own life? I hope that this is useful to you so far. All right, let's move on to the third step. Let's go to the third step, which is where I'm going to end this podcast for today. And this third step is what I call reframing. Reframing, and at this point, I hope that you can still see my screen. Reframing. Of course, a lot of people talk about reframing, but in the context of fear today, what I want to pass on to you is for you to look at. So let's say you see yourself as someone who is a coward, who is afraid, who is anxious, who is, depending on the label you choose. Back then, when I used to teach fear as a main subject, and by the way, that story that I told you that time about Michael Hyatt and all of that, so that actually led me down the path of trying to figure out how to solve the fears that I have in my own life. And that was what led me to studying psychology and neuroscience, because I needed to even solve it for myself. From there, again, there are a lot of stories in my life. And that's one thing I've started saying, that all of us are made up of a bunch of stories. We just need to find the right ones at the right time. All right, back to reframing. So, reframing is about taking something and giving it a new label. Now, when we talk about fear, fear here, what I want you to understand is fear can be a lot of things to a lot of people. So, for example, anxiety is a form of fear. Stress is a form of fear. Let me be sure this is showing on my screen. Okay. Stress is a form of fear. Nervousness is a form of fear. Worry is a form of fear. Doubt is a form of fear. I can go on and continue listing all of that right now. What I want you to understand is whatever label you are using right now, can you reframe that? So let me explain it this way. When you see someone do something you're afraid of doing, what do you say to yourself? When you view fear as a threat, something you should never do, our bodies go into battle mode, even temporarily. Because your body will always want to do what your mind says. Your mind, a lot of times, is influenced by your mouth. I hope you understand that. Your body will respond to your mind. Your mind is influenced by your mouth. I think I should actually draw that here. So it's like this. Mouth influences mind. Mind influences body. So mouth influences mind. Mind influences body. This here, what I call it is that at every point in time, there's a story you're telling yourself about whatever you're afraid of. There's a story you're telling yourself. Now, for this becomes a script that begins to play at the back of your mind. And this becomes the strategy that your body responds to. So a lot of times, if you don't tell yourself a good story, a great story, a positive story, just as with turning negative experiences, bringing out positive benefits from that. If you don't intentionally tell yourself a positive story, your mind will create a negative script and your body will strategize executing that negative script. What I want you to understand here is that you can always turn fear into something positive. And this is not a woo-woo, this is not a motivational strategy here. It is literally you understanding that your body will respond to your mind will respond to your mouth. So you use your language to actually tell yourself what you want to see. Your mind, by the way, the normal human mind does not know what is completely real from what is completely imagined. If you close your eyes right now and I tell you that don't imagine an elephant, you will struggle to not actually imagine an elephant. It's even possible that you're imagining a blue elephant right now. But what have I told you? I told you not to imagine an elephant. Even when I'm telling you not to do it, your mind will not respond to the instruction to not do it. Your mind will actually do it. That's how much your mind is influenced by language, is influenced by what you say with your mouth. So when you pick a situation where you are afraid of, what you want to do is you want to reframe that fear. So when you view fear as a threat, something you should never attempt, what you do is you create a cage for yourself. And you can continue to live inside that cage for as long as you like. But what if you can actually reframe that and turn that fear into a challenge you need to overcome? And turning it into a challenge means that you gamify fear. It means that part of reframing fear is you gamify fear. And when I say gamify, let me explain that to you. So you turn it into a game that if I climb to this step, let me use a green here so as to celebrate life. So it means if I go from here to this point, I'm going to celebrate. If I go from here to this place, I'll celebrate another thing. Okay, looks like the contrast of the green is not very good. So let me change it to a darker green. Don't mind me. I'm a designer, so if it's not clear in my eyes, it cannot be clear to 1,000 other persons. That's how I used to see things. In order to make that a little better for us to see, let me select all of that here. And let me change the color for that. Okay, so now it's a bit clearer. All right? So what I want you to pay attention to here is, what you want to do is you want to reframe fear as a challenge. You want to say, okay, I'm going to get to this point where I'm going to actually celebrate everything. And you want to take it one step at a time. Now, for example, fear of failure is what we are currently discussing, right? So it means if you're afraid of failure, what if you can say, if I get to this point, I'm going to give myself a gift. So let's say you say, if I get to this point, I'm going to give myself a gift, and the gift is going to be packaged, and I'm going to give myself a gift. What that means is the fact that you tell yourself that you are going to give yourself a gift, you've gamified that fear. You've turned it from an adversary to a challenge. And because the human brain responds to challenges differently from fear, what happens is it actually creates neurochemicals in your body that kind of gives you the adrenaline pump in order to want to say, oh, I think I can do that. So what happens is, if you're afraid of failure, pick the object of failure and ask yourself, how can I gamify this? How can I turn it into a challenge that I need to overcome? Once you turn it into a challenge, what you want to do is you want to break it down into tiny steps. So this tiny step could be related to this, and this could be here, and this could be here. So all you want to do is you want to take step 1, step 2, step 3. So you just basically want to go step by step. The reason why the fear looks big, the reason why the fear looks grandiose to you is because it's just something that exists inside your head. Now, that statement may feel insensitive, but I do not take that for granted. I'm not trying to downplay however you may be feeling. I'm just helping you understand that the reason why it looks big is because you've not kind of itemized or put it into a context that you can physically see. Maybe like putting it on paper, perhaps, or maybe breaking it down, depending on how you work. Once you start putting it into steps like these, what you realize that the pangs of fear that you have towards that subject begins to go down. So let's say your boss is approaching, or maybe somebody that you don't want to interface with is going to join a meeting that you are going to be in. Instead of retreating, instead of pulling it back, instead of pulling back, instead of not wanting to be in that meeting, what if you can visualize it as a puzzle you need to solve? Maybe a deficiency you need to correct. Perhaps it could be, maybe it's in terms of attitude, it could be in terms of behavior, it could be maybe how you carry your body. So once you begin to itemize that, you say, okay, what's going to happen is if I enter that meeting, this is how I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do this. What you realize is the mental shift on its own will unlock capabilities you didn't know that you have. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. Framing the fear is like a puzzle, like a game, helps you to critically analyze whatever the object of fear is, and it helps you to mentally disengage from that fear. So it kind of puts you into an analytical solution. Now, people say that analysis paralysis. The interesting thing is that analysis paralysis actually works for fear. Anytime you are afraid of something, it's because there is an insight, an information, a knowledge gap that exists that you've not identified yet. Maybe a problem-solving ability of your brain that you've not yet tapped into. Now, converting that panicked response of fear into a cool, capable mentality of handling the challenge and on, that can literally bring you a lot of peace, a lot of joy. Now, as I wrap up this episode, I want you to understand that the choice is actually yours. Fear of failure is incredibly common. Almost every entrepreneur, there was a research I even carried out many years ago, I think. Many years ago, no, that should be about 2 or 3 years ago. I ran a survey. That was when I was back in Nigeria. I ran a survey where I actually surveyed, I think about 20-something different entrepreneurs. And one of the consistent fears that they have, apart from traumas they've experienced, and by the way, trauma is a word that's currently being thrown around by everybody, even though something may not necessarily be traumatic. They just throw trauma around. Now, what I learned from that research was that entrepreneurs battle a lot of fears. And that fear of failure is one of them. And it's incredibly common. I mean, literally common. So if entrepreneurs are experiencing fear, now imagine how much. If entrepreneurs are experiencing fear, imagine what happens if you're now an employee and you are now, and the entrepreneur itself, or maybe employer is having fear. How about you being the employee? You're also having fear. And that's something I want you to take away from this session. Let me say it this way. Every single human being has fear. In the fear system that I teach, in the system I teach around fear, I call it a fear spectrum. We are all on different parts of that fear. So someone could be at a 0. Actually, very few people, literally, well, in my studies, I've not found one person who is at a 0. Most people could be at 1. In fact, that's where most people are. They're at 1. And then there are some who are at 10. So if you take it as 0 to 10, some people are at 10 on the spectrum. When they are at 10, people who are at 1 or at 2 see them as, oh, that person is very nervous. That person is very afraid. Just as I showed you earlier, let me bring back my screen here. So just as I explained here, that there are various layers of fear. Anxiety, stress, nervousness, worry, doubt, sleeplessness. For entrepreneurs, it could even be financial. There are a lot of fears that people experience. And what I want you to understand is that you are not alone. Fear of failure can breed self-doubt. It can stop you from making progress. It can cause you to compromise your values just to avoid potential embarrassment or setbacks at work. But you have the power to break free from those constraints. With the right tools and mindset shifts, just as some of those that I've shared with you in this episode, you can use that fear as a fuel to propel you towards the meaningful goals that matter most to you. Just as I said at the beginning of this podcast, my goal with the Dayo Samuel report is to provide you the courage and the necessary insights you need to lead your life and business in the direction that matters most to you. So what is it going to be? Will you let the fear of failure keep you stuck? Or are you ready to break the frame and create the life that you want? I know the path forward may not look easy right now, but I want you to know that you've got this. If you need an understanding guide, someone who has been there, who has walked that road themselves, well, I'm just a message away. I'm just a DM away. You can always send a message to me. But until then, I want you to keep pushing forward, keep moving forward. Just as I've shared with you in this episode so far, turn negative experiences into positive benefits. Extract all the positive lessons you can extract from failures that you've had in the past. That will probably uncover a lot of patterns that you're repeating right now. Second, find references. Find forerunners, people who have been there and done that you are going to use for your own self. It could be that you are going to look for entrepreneurs who've completed what you're trying to do. It could be that you will look for companies, stories. It's the reason I even have a folder in my Notion board that I literally call metaphors and stories. As I come across things, I document them, I note them down, So there's always a story, and every story has something to teach me, even when it's a negative one. So seek out people. And the third thing I shared with you is reframe the fear. Turn that fear into a challenge. Rather than seeing the fear as this gargantuan object that seems to keep you stuck, turn it into a challenge that you can gradually overcome step by step. So again, I'm going to ask you the question. Will you let the fear of failure keep you stuck? The answer is yours to answer. I know this may not be easy for you, but I want you to understand that I'm here and I'll be rooting for your success every step of the way. In fact, if you need to always remember, you can simply look at, for example, on my YouTube channel, you'll see the banner there, courage to do the things that truly matter to you. I hope that this episode has been useful to you. If it has, please leave a comment, share this with someone, and I hope that this makes sense to you. I am Dayo Samuel, reporting on the Dayo Samuel Report. I'll see you next time on this podcast. I can see 26 people joining me live, and that's very interesting. Thank you very much to every single person who's joined me live. I just hope that this has been useful to you. I'll see you next time on another episode of the Dayo Samuel Report.